Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching Business at 9 with me, Sumita Karir. Our top story on the show is related to aviation. Well, the DGCA has ordered inspection of fuel control switches on all Boeing aircrafts. In fact, that's our top story. And we are getting more details as to the stories that now all affected airlines must complete the required inspections. In fact, all carriers operating Boeing 737 and 787 aircraft will complete inspections of the fuel control switch locking mechanisms by July 21st, 2025. My colleague Sameer Dikshit is now joining in with more details. Sameer, so this entire angle of a switch inspection, that becomes all the more important given the fact that initially there were, of course, claims being made that it was perhaps a pilot error, but now definitely fuel switches are in focus and they will need proper inspection.
In an important development in the aviation space, the aviation regulator DGCA has issued the order advising the airlines to do the inspection of the Boeing 737 and Boeing 787 aircraft related to the fuel switch control mechanism, and this entire inspection of the fuel switch has to be completed latest by July 21st, and the inspection report has to be submitted to the regional officer or the regional DGCA officer. So this inspection order came in the light that recently AAIB, the investigating authority of Air India's aircraft crash, they submitted the preliminary report to the aviation ministry, and which highlighted an important part that the fuel switch, it moved from run position to cutoff position at 13:38 hours when the flight took off. Immediately after a few seconds, this switched of fuel supply that moved from run position to switch off position. This was a very important aspect in the preliminary report, after which there were multiple questions that were raised related to the safety of the aircraft, related to this particular aspect of fuel control switch. And in the same light, DGCA has ordered that all the airlines, they have to complete the inspection of the fuel switch control mechanism by July 21st. And not just the Indian aviation regulator, a couple of other international airlines, they have already started the inspection following the US FAA guideline or the recommendations. For example, Singapore Airlines, Etihad, and even South Korean Airlines, they have already started the inspections. And another important development also came in, where Air India CEO Campbell Wilson wrote a letter to the employees mentioning that the aircraft had undergone the mandatory maintenance, and there was no issue that was reported. Even the pilots, they have undergone mandatory pre-flight breath analyzer test, and no medical observation was done. There was no safety observation issued in the preliminary report. So these are a couple of important developments taking place related to Air India's aircraft crash, but the government wants to ensure that the aircraft safety, the entire parameters should be upheld, and the DGCA order is a step in the same direction.
For bringing us all of those details. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, this directive follows a fatal crash of Air India 787 last month, where the fuel switch movement is currently under investigation, and that really is the key factor. And this renewed focus on fuel switches follows preliminary findings by the AAIB in the Air India flight AI171 crash, which happened on June 12th, which actually revealed that both engines lost power after the fuel switches moved to cut off just seconds after takeoff, and it wasn't really a pilot error in that case. In fact, these switches are designed with a mechanical lock to prevent accidental movement, though earlier advisories have noted rare failures. Now, whether this played a role in the AI171 crash, that remains under investigation. But today, the aviation regulator DGCA has issued a safety order for all aircraft registered in the country, and now all affected airlines must complete the required inspections. In fact, all Indian carriers that are operating Boeing 737 and 787 aircraft will have to complete the inspection of these fuel control switching locking mechanisms by July 21st, 2025. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, I'm now joined by a live guest who's now joining us. Joining us now is Air Commander retired B.S. Siwach, Director General Aviation Safety in India. Thank you very much, Mr. Siwach, for joining us here on ET Now. Let's start then with the latest updates that are coming in. Well, this is essentially on the inspection of fuel switches, which has suddenly been made mandatory. That definitely is a welcome move, Mr. Siwach, for airline safety in future. But why is the DGCA waking up now when close to 300 lives have been lost? And on what basis could the DGCA have decided that inspections earlier were perhaps not mandatory?
Say again, please. Sorry, I was disturbed. Please say again your question.
Yes, Mr. Siwach, I was referring to this DGCA inspection of fuel switches, that, of course, advisory that has gone out and now it's been made mandatory for all aircraft. This definitely, like I said, is a welcome move for airline safety. But why is the DGCA waking up now? And on what basis did the DGCA earlier decide that perhaps such inspections were not mandatory, despite there being a report by the FAA in 2018?
You see, now DGCA had taken this proactive step to instruct all the airlines which are operating Boeing aircrafts to carry out the check on their fuel cutoff switches, fuel regulator switches. Now, yes, you are right. This FAA Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin was issued in 2018. Now, this special airworthiness bulletin, it was not mandatory. It was optional at the time. And that is why the Air India, which is operating this Boeing type of aircrafts, did not take any action, and in fact, it ignored it. That was a serious lapse on the part of the airline, because you can't afford to ignore even if it is advisory and not mandatory, because fuel regulator switch is of very critical importance in an aircraft. Your engine continued function depends on this fuel cutoff switch. Now, if the fuel cutoff switch gets disengaged and is brought to the cutoff position, obviously engine will flame out. That is what happened during this Air India 171 accident. Now, the inquiry team had just made a mention of this in passing. In fact, it should have been the investigation team which should have flagged this issue, that this one-time check inspection of the switch must be carried out based on the FAA Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin. But the investigation team did nothing of that sort. Thankfully, the DGCA has intervened, and it is really a welcome step, a very proactive initiative to carry out check of all the aircrafts of Air India Express, Akasha, and SpiceJet.
Yes, sir.
So this report had to be submitted by 21st
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
of July.
Right. Yes. Yes, sir.
Yes. You are saying something.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, but why did the DGCA ignore that report? I mean, because of the fact that there were perhaps no consequences, would you still call this step, what DGCA has taken today, proactive? Because close to 300 lives have been lost, despite there being a report by FAA, like I stated, in 2018.
You see, this bulletin from FAA had come to Air India. And Air India is the agency which is operating these types of aircrafts. So they did not follow the instructions because there is no mandatory tag given to it. Now, DGCA had further investigated. They had done brainstorming, and after that, they had come to decision that even though it had not been recommended by the investigate agency, in the interest of safety, we must make sure that this particular switch is checked for its functionality. So I agree with you to a certain extent. Then maybe, but maybe DGCA, because the airlines is also supposed to follow. I mean, they think they are
Right,
supposed to
sir.
follow only
Will right,
mandatory
sir.
recommendations. It was a advisory, that's why.
Right,
But
sir.
in
So we'll
such
come to
critical
the airlines.
cases,
Yes, sir.
in such critical cases, you
Right, sir.
cannot afford to ignore when, as I told you, this fuel cutoff, fuel regulator switch is very, important switch, very critical switch.
Yes.
And anything related to that
Yes.
should have been taken
Yes.
much more seriously the moment it came. Unfortunately, after our investigation report was
Yes, sir.
made public, even the
Right, sir.
Boeing industry, Boeing company, as well as GE Electric, which manufactured this
Yes.
engine, they also have not bothered to again remind that at least please now carry out the inspection because they had such a ghastly accident.
Right,
So
sir.
that is very, I don't know
Right, sir.
whom are they trying to
Right,
cover
sir.
up or something, or they don't want to invite,
Right, sir.
focus on their
Absolutely. And
own.
you are raising some very important points, sir. Yes, sir. You're raising some very important points. In fact, the US aviation regulator has said that fuel control switches in Boeing airplanes are safe. That's been reported by the BBC. We'll come to all of these points that have been raised. But let me ask you once again on the point of DGCA. Would you agree that the DGCA has failed as a regulator given the number of lives that have been lost and, of course, this irresponsible act of not paying heed to that report earlier?
No, it is not the direct, implication on DGCA. It is the airline. You see, DGCA would have intervened if there was a mandatory requirement. Optional requirement, airline is the operator. They know they are operating these aircraft, so they know all the requirements of this aircraft. So DGCA must have communicated to them. But then that time it was not taken seriously. So you can't really sort of, directly blame DGCA. It's the airline which is accountable in this respect, which had failed to carry out its task. So that should have been done by the airline. DGCA, to a certain extent, you can sort of
Yes, sir.
say something against them,
Right.
but they have made up by ensuring that even without the, some instruction from the Boeing company and the General Electric and the investigate agency, they have taken this
Right, sir.
proactive step. So they must be commended for this rather than, find fault with them.
Okay, but they have also lapsed somewhere in their responsibility when it comes to regular inspections and checks of aircraft, of course, of airlines. But let's move on to the airline. You were speaking about the airline and that, of course, the sole responsibility, at least the maximum responsibility here lies with the airline. But Sir Campbell Wilson, the CEO of Air India, has stated, and I quote, that the preliminary report found no mechanical or maintenance issues with the aircraft or engines. Air India hasn't really addressed the issue of switch safety. So is Air India, would you agree that Air India only focused to meet certain goals of a planned PR exercise for the brand and attacking the media instead of fixing actual issues with its flights?
You're absolutely right. He should not have made such a statement. It is the fault lies with the airline. They have such a serious and sensitive issue was ignored by them. So they are actually accountable for this. And the CEO, rather than making such statements, he should also accept his accountability and maybe some kind of action can be taken against the CEO on this issue. because that's a very serious issue. So many lives have been lost because of their casual attitude and approach. So there is a need to sort of make sure that some heads roll and people are held accountable. People can't get away with this kind of, careless attitude, casual attitude.
Right, sir. So there is casual attitude, and of course, responsibility is not really being owned up by any of these airlines. And in fact, the U.S. aviation regulator, like I was earlier pointing out, it is said that control switches in Boeing airplanes are safe. That claim was then carried by the BBC, which also wrongly quoted Saturday's report. So is this brazen whitewashing of corporate lapses, especially when evidence actually states facts to the contrary, sir?
No, there is, to a certain extent, I agree that these switches are quite safe because thousands of Boeing aircrafts are flying all over the world, and they must have flown billions of hours. And this particular defect has not occurred on them. So their claim that it is very safe, to a certain extent, is justified. But after this accident, still if they are not taking it seriously, then definitely there is appear to be some cover-up. They don't want to invite any kind of focus or fingers pointed at Boeing company. So that is the unfortunate part, but they're definitely an attempt to cover up and avoid any kind of, scrutiny on Boeing, any kind of focus on Boeing.
Right, sir. But can Boeing really evade scrutiny and evade accountability now?
They cannot, but they are a very powerful organization and they can get away with this. But there are people who want to expose them, and definitely they are working very hard. But you see, Boeing is a very old company, reputed company. Of course, after this Boeing Max accident, and after that, the reputation of Boeing has been sullied, and they are actually in docks now. Even the American Congress, they have questioned their CEOs on their safety standard, work culture, and seriousness in manufacturing. So definitely they are under scanner and they are under a lot of pressure. But if there's some action is taken against Boeing, which can lead to very serious consequences of Boeing, $150 billion almost are at stake. So Boeing will take, various measures to ensure that no finger are pointed at them and their reputation does not get affected. That is why they'll use various broadcasting channels and all that to influence the opinion about the Boeing, that it still continue to be a safe and efficient organization. But time has come when serious question must be asked and some
No further action.
action must be taken against Boeing.
Right, so action must be taken, and that's essentially what you're also hinting at. But do you think there will be action taken against Boeing, especially when this news has become a global story? And of course, there are global regulators that are doing their own independent checks.
I doubt if any of such things will happen because Boeing is a very powerful company. America is a very powerful country. And they will tell everybody that we had issued a special airworthiness information bulletin way back in 2018. If some airlines have not bothered to follow on their guidelines, follow on their instructions, then it is their fault and you can't find fault with Boeing. But that is not that's very specious argument, but still, because of their influence, power, and American power and Federal Aviation Administration, ICAO, they are all under their control. So they'll be able to, avoid any kind of direct action on Boeing because it has a ramification on their economy also. So that is another very important part, that it may have an adverse impact on US economy because Boeing generates a lot of revenue for American economy. Madam.
Right, sir. Right, sir. So it remains to be seen whether there will be action taken against Boeing, against, of course, Air India as well, to whatever extent that these airlines are responsible. And, of course, DGCA, which needs to, of course, fix its own management issues and regulatory issues as well. Sir, thank you very much for taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET Now on that very crucial story. Ladies and gentlemen, DGCA has mandated airlines, all affected airlines, to complete the required inspection norms, especially that of fuel switches. On that note, it's